Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Keep It Simple podcast. Today we're in for a treat, episode 14. My very dear friend, Travis Smith, has agreed to come on. Travis, he and I know one another through school. We're on this learning journey together, but like many of you who follow along and listen, it almost instantaneously was this kind of take one to know one, kindred spirits. You kind of know your people, and Travis and I connected in that way from the beginning. We've only really been together in person 2 different times in different settings, but have emailed and text back and forth very consistently. And Travis and his wife Allyson live in Rutherfordton, North Carolina, but the church that he serves is in Asheville, and so I know a lot of you have connections with North Carolina and the Asheville area, so you'll be familiar with that. But without further ado, Travis, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for making time to come on, man.
Thank you, Ben. I'm happy to be here.
So just kind of a snapshot, if you don't mind, who you are. It's obvious that you're in ministry, but kind of who you are, where you are, what you're up to, just kind of familiarize our folks with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in ministry for it's 20-something years. I started when I pastored my first church when I was 20 years old.
Wow.
And I joked, I grew up in the Baptist tradition and lived out that calling in the Baptist church for many years before joining the Methodist church.
Yeah.
But one of the things I would joke with my congregation is like, good thing we aren't Catholic. I can't buy communion wine because I was 20. So that's been my journey. I mean, I started when I was 20 years old. I'm in my mid-40s now. And began my work in the Baptist tradition. That again is where I had my grounding as a young man and a young adult. Went to a Baptist college, then to a Baptist seminary, and then pastored in Baptist churches for many years. But currently, I'm pastoring in the Methodist church, but one of the things that I really have a passion for right now is I work on 2 different fronts. I'm a bivocational minister. Sometimes I say trivocational because I also teach for a university on a very adjunct level.
Oh, wow.
So,
I didn't know that, man. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's sometimes I do teach courses for a local university, so I do that on the side as well. But my main 2 things that I do that take up most of my time is I'm an executive director for a nonprofit. That's my 40-hour-a-week paid job.
Okay.
And then I work part-time with a traditional church in Asheville, United Methodist Church in Asheville. And then I also love to do fresh expressions. That's one of my passions. I know you've already talked about that on here already, but that's definitely one of the areas where I spend a good chunk of any other time that I have trying to invest in cultivating those communities and working in them.
Awesome. And for a deeper dive on fresh expressions, if you haven't, go back and catch episode Luke Edwards was on a few weeks ago. Luke is a friend of ours. We're all kind of in the same learning environment together and growing together. And like you, I mean, Luke is one of us. It's one of those take one to know one kind of things like we were talking about. So, the work that we're doing together is this fresh expressions and church renewal, and it's, how do we make a life of faith or church available to the unchurched, right? And so so much of that work, and what I really would like to spend a good bit of time here talking about, what's fascinating to me about you is your work with mental health and specifically with loneliness. And so I think that'd be a great place to start. Kind of why are you drawn to that? At what point did you start that research and work? Because it was long before we ended up at United, I think.
Yeah.
Am I right in that?
Yeah, you're right.
And so let's just kind of talk through that a little in your story in that.
Yeah, so I have to go back in my story to kind of go to that place of how all this intersects for me and the work that I do on loneliness. So for me, all that began, I was pastoring a church. I was also a full-time chaplain with hospice at that time. I worked in hospice work for almost 13 years. And by that point, I was ready to transition out of the church ministry for a while and kind of focus on my chaplaincy work in hospice more. So I left the church that I was serving bivocationally, left there and was focusing on my work in chaplaincy. And during that time, I mean, it was a long time coming, but long story short, I endured separation and a divorce. Okay. And during that separation and divorce, I all of a sudden found myself for the first time not working in the church, not being married.
Wow.
Yeah, so all of a sudden, the entire structures that my life had been built around were not there anymore. I had been attending a church, but hadn't fully got integrated in there because I was just all this happened within about 2 months of me leaving the the bivocational church that I was serving.
Wow.
So I was faced with that crisis all of a sudden, that all that I have ever really known and connected with wasn't there in terms of being connected to a community, being connected to people. So I began to feel this significant isolation, this significant loneliness in my own life. And I'm just going to be honest. I mean, this is the place to be honest, right?
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
So one of the things that I found is that in the tradition I was serving in, now that I was separated and enduring the divorce that I was, it was almost like it was contagious. They were afraid they might catch it. So the friends that I used to be connected with, they were gone. They weren't necessarily as there as closely as they had been. And I don't want to sound like I'm taking any swings toward them. I think they were trying to figure out the best way forward for themselves too. But so all of a sudden, the things I had known were gone. My loneliness and isolation were increased, and I was feeling a lot of angst about that. And one of the places that I found connection, quite honestly, was because no one knew who I was at a local pub. I would drive myself over there in the afternoons after I got off work, and really wouldn't drink that much, maybe have one beer, but I would just talk. That became my community, because these individuals that I connected with there, they didn't know my past. They didn't know who I had been or what I had done. All they knew is I was a really good listener, and they enjoyed talking to me. So what happened is my ministry began to develop there, and that's where the work that I felt connected to and called to began to really develop. And I started doing a fresh expression long before I knew it was fresh expression. I didn't have the terminology for that. But so that's where I noticed, like, okay, if I'm going through this loneliness and isolation, if I'm enduring this in my life because of this life event that happened, how many more people are out there dealing with something very similar? Maybe they didn't have a big life event, but they've just chronically dealt with this loneliness and feeling of disconnection. And I knew by my experience that the third places that people gather, pubs, parks, wherever we want to put in the blank there, they're there already. And a lot of them are there because they want a connection. They want something that they can't find at home alone. They're there to be a part of something bigger than themselves even. So that was my story. I mean, I began to realize that. So a long time ago, loneliness and isolation was a very personal experience for me, which then led out to, okay, this is work God has called me to. I would never wish anyone to have to endure their marriage coming to an end. But I also believe that God doesn't waste things. And this happened in my life, and I can take this now, God can take this and use it to help others. And that's where my first passion for the work that I now do many years later around loneliness and isolation first found its seed.
Wow. So there's a tie there. So my friend Gabe Barrett, I don't remember, I think he's like episode 4 maybe, or Gabe, incredible dude, played football at Auburn University. I met Gabe in summer missions going under bridges in Atlanta and into some of the most forgotten places in the city. But Gabe's story, he was working, he was doing mission work, hosted or through this kind of very fluent church, and Gabe went through a divorce. And his experience sounds a lot like yours, in that wrestling through, I don't know, because I've never been through divorce, but I don't know that the church always gets that right. I have been in churches where, I say that, I've been in a church where as I come in as a new pastor and I look through who used to be in the church and who is not now and start touching base, and then I'm told, well, ever how many years ago I went through a divorce and this was my experience. And so then to try to encourage or invite people back into the fellowship on the backside of that. So your experience, what does it say about the church when you feel better connected at the pub than you do, especially a person that's a pastor, right? So a person that's been in ministry since they're 20, that goes through crisis, what does it say about the North American church when you find authentic community easier at a pub than you do in the church? Not a knock against your church or wherever you were, but just kind of as a blanket statement. What does that say about the church?
I think it says, for me, it says what I know to be true from what I've seen elsewhere too, not only in the churches I've served, but other churches, is that we as the North American church are not doing a very good job at connecting with people at the big moments of their life. So these big moments, and I call them crisis moments, because crisis, we use that word as a bad word, but really crisis is any event or change that affects our life. Some could be good, some could be bad. So we as the church don't do well with that, though. We don't do well with meeting people at some of the biggest points of change in their life, whether that be, matter of fact, whether that be a new marriage, whether that be a divorce, whether that be an empty nest, whether that be the death of a parent or death of a loved one. The church struggles beyond just providing some food. Struggles really to connect at that place and have a word of authenticity to the wounded part of the soul, or fearful part of the soul, whatever it is in that moment. And that's what I found in the pub, though, was that individuals there, man, the expectation for language was gone. They didn't feel like you had to talk a certain way or uphold a certain brand. Man, it was just authentic conversation around, oh, this stinks. Things can stink in life.
Embrace the suck. So had you done hospice work before this, or did this lead you into hospice work?
No, I had been doing hospice work before this. So I had been, yes, I started hospice work around 2006. And I went through separation divorce between 2010 and 2011. But so at that point, I had been doing this for quite some time before I went through this experience.
So then how, because divorce, right, is like a death. How was your experience and the equipping that you received in hospice work? Were you able to minister to you or not?
That's the funny thing, is that it's one thing to know something cognitively, but it's another thing to be able to be experiential with it in your soul and heart. I had all the language around grief, loss, shift, change. Like, I had all that language, but it was hard sometimes to put that into practice for myself. Because you were living it, right? So you didn't have the ghetto pass yet. It's kind of like, you could go to a rodeo and try to minister to a bunch of rodeo cowboys, and they may or may not listen to you just being polite, but you've never been there, you never lived it, you're not one of them. And I think oftentimes as leaders, whether it be in the church or
just in our communities, we go and we do have this head knowledge, but we don't have that heart experience. And once you have lived that, right? Once you've lived through that, then you got the ghetto pass. Then you have permission to speak into some of those wounds in a way that I do not. Like it would be the equivalent of me trying to step in and use the Christianese with a person or a couple that was going through that. It's counterfeit. It's not authentic. So yeah, from that crisis comes what Brennan Manning calls the wounded healers. So how far out is it that you were doing hospice work? You went through this death, if you will, and then on the other side of that, were you able to take that experience and then the head knowledge? I imagine you became a juggernaut for loving people that were in that type of crisis.
Yeah, I mean, it really did change the way I do ministry. It changed the way I do life. It changed the way I treat myself, even.
Amen, man.
It really impacted all of that. And that was one of the cool things about what began to develop in my connections in the bar and the pub is that many individuals who were sitting there had been through similar disappointments or maybe even something even far more catastrophic. And being in the pain and having the pain myself and sitting with them in their pain, you said it right. There becomes this rite of passage now that we don't understand exactly each other, but we do understand what pain feels like and this kind of pain feels like. And that acknowledgement with each other deepened the authenticity even further than what I already found there. Because one of the coolest things, as you're in there and you're making connections in these places that people don't know you, this was a time where it was almost unheard of that you would have church in a bar or have spiritual conversations in a bar, although they were happening long before any of us ever started doing anything like this. One of the things that inevitably would happen is someone would say, whoa, wait a minute. You're an ordained minister? And they would just have this kind of aha moment of, wow, it doesn't matter who you are or where you've been, life can happen. You're not immune to the troubles of this world just because you serve God, just because you have some kind of 3 letters before your name, Reverend. I mean, Rev. It's not. It doesn't take you out of the reality of pain and experience. And really what it did for me is it gave me a deeper credibility, because all of a sudden these folks many of them who had been hurt in church or ostracized by church felt deeply wounded by the North American version of what we had as church, that they began to trust again somebody who was from that tradition. And because I now was amongst the pain, I was also someone who'd experienced it in that way and was being I was being vulnerable and authentic with them as well. And that evening of, I hate to say playing field, it's not a playing field, but the sense that somehow I wasn't coming in as one like sometimes we do in church of, I have the truth, I have this gospel, I'm going to lay this down, you guys listen. It wasn't like that at all. It was very, very much reciprocal in that we were caring for each other, being true community. And that really increased their respect for even someone of the Christian faith.
Yeah, that's that equal footing. And the beautiful thing about that part of your story is you didn't go in to create a new community of faith. You went in to have a beer and be a person that nobody really... I mean, there was no agenda, I guess is what I'm saying. It's not as if you sat in a strategic planning meeting with your board of directors or elders and deacons and said, okay, we need to really forge into missions, and so let's go spend time at the local pub. It was, you were hurting and looking for somewhere to exist.
I was looking for somewhere to hide, honestly. I was looking for somewhere to slither into and just escape anybody really knowing who I was, what I was going through. And it's just like God to then already be there. And be setting up this scene where, like, You thought you were coming here to hide, but actually you've come to where you're going to be seen.
Yeah.
Maybe seen more authentically than you've ever been seen.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So from that season of your life, then there was this seed planted to really begin to focus on and research and learn about mental health, but more specifically loneliness. Is that fair?
Right. Yeah, that's definitely fair. And it led to me actually putting a name to what we were doing in the bar that actually may have started with me, but then evolved into something much more structured and formal after that.
What is that?
That's Sacred Ale. It's still happening to this day. It's 9 years old. It was happening long before that, but it's been named for 9 years in that we meet in a local pub, or we meet somewhere where people can drink if they choose, not if they choose, but we talk about life, love, doubt, faith, all those spiritual things that are part of who we are. And we've been doing that for 9 years, and that really all developed out of my own experience and belief. Yeah, my own brokenness, and the belief that some of us feel safer outside of the stained glass and brick and steeples. Some of us have had some experiences where we just feel safer in different environments. And because we feel safer in those third spaces or environments, then we let down some of the anger, maybe some of the resentment, some of those things that can be hard to have communication with in traditional church settings because of people's baggage and our baggage too. Some of that gets let down in these spaces that aren't connected to that. And that's what I found to be true, is these individuals are still needing to connect in community. They're very lonely and isolated, but finding that place where you could express doubt, express faith, express all these things in a safe environment really began to deepen, the work that we were doing and added to it. And so out of that, you're exactly right. I mean, that's the seed of then which eventually led to later me starting a mental health agency, founding that, getting it up and going, and providing mental health care to our community regardless of their ability to pay, and bringing in the people that can do that. And I can speak more about this in a moment, but COVID and the kind of what we saw after COVID really led to some escalation of what we do around loneliness as well.
Okay. So back to Sacred Ale. Sacred Ale is 9 years old. So what does that look like? What does a regular session, like real talk, what does a regular session of Sacred Ale look like? Your weekly meeting?
Yeah, you know what's so... Yeah, it's changed a little bit in frequency, but at one time we were weekly. We don't do that now.
Okay.
We paused for a few moments during COVID, like we all did, but we started back. So typically a meeting is going to look like this. First, we'll kind of gather together. There's a start time at 7 p.m. Hardly does everybody get there at 7. My joke in Sacred Ale is like, we have the talk, but then we have to go back and have it again because somebody else came in.
Yes.
So we end up kind of keep rolling this conversation as comes rolling as people come in.
Yes.
So typically, though, most people are there. They kind of drift in and get settled by 7:15, 7:30ish, and then we have a topic. So to give you an example, the last one I just finished up last Tuesday was. We had a conversation around research that I've been reading about how people from the ages of 13 to 26 are expressing their spirituality. So I read this research briefly, and I said, how do you identify with it? How do you not identify with it? Which then opened the door up for them to talk about ways they express their spirituality and what it looks like for them. Which then my follow-up conversations with them during the meeting are, okay, when's the last time you had a sacred moment? And what was that? What did it look like? So I may start with something that's rather big and broad because it's safe. And then as the conversation gets going, I usually try to pull it in pretty tight to what's personal for the individual. So that's a typical conversation.
Are you together usually an hour, or are you more or less? Or?
Typically, we set it for about an hour and 15 minutes, but I've many times at that time said, hey, officially, I know some of you need to go, head out, but I'm still here listening, we'll talk. I mean, we've had some conversations go 2.5 hours, but
wow.
But I always stop it and give that pass at the time we said we're going to end.
Awesome.
So nobody feels like they're obligated to stay here.
And so do the bar owners and managers, are they good with that? Or was there any concern on the front end about you maybe running off, customers?
Oh, yeah.
How was that? How did you navigate all that?
Yeah, so what I went to, we started in the pub that I used to go to during my darkest hours. So they knew me, number one. They know who I am. They understood more about me than just, hey, this kid's trying to come in here and start a church.
Yeah.
So they knew that wasn't the goal.
Yeah.
But what I did is I went to them and I said, when is your slowest night?
Okay.
And they said Tuesdays. Tuesdays are our slowest nights. I said, well, let me ask this. If I could potentially draw in 10 to 15 people that most likely are probably going to buy something here, would you be open to letting me have a small space over here to gather? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I was forthright. I said, this is what it's going to be about. Yeah. It's going to be about doubt. It's going to be about faith. It's going to be a very open conversation, not judgmental. We don't have an agenda other than to love people and to invite them into conversation. So when I presented it that way, they were great. I mean, wow. They were like, yeah, that would be fantastic.
So, the goal is not then to get those 12, 15, 20 people into church.
No.
Yeah.
I believe what we're doing is church.
Yeah. And that's
they're already there.
That's what Luke and I spent a lot of our conversation, and I got a lot of feedback, from encouraging feedback from my conversation with Luke. People saying it's so refreshing to hear leaders talk about loving people where they are with no strings attached, like no agenda, no stepping stones, like this is community. This isn't a step to get you into what we believe is community, like this is community.
Yeah, it's a place to belong.
Yeah.
And that's the goal. And I'll tell you now, even today, 9 years later, some of the people who were there on day one are still there.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, some of the people are still there, and they will tell you this is church for me.
Yeah.
This is it.
Yeah.
On any given meeting, 98% of the people there are not connected to a traditional church.
Okay. So I'm sure you got some really great stories. So we're storytellers, right? That's what we do. What are maybe just one or two, depending on what you got? What are some of your favorite? Like a 9-year sample size is a pretty good sample size. I'm sure you've got some phenomenal stories. What are a couple of your favorites?
Yeah. I think one that ranks up to the top for me, and this individual is still coming 9 years later. Yeah. But it was so, and I'll add, so to couch the story, I have to kind of tell you where she was, what happened, and where she is now. So she began to come with her husband. He and her both came to the meeting, and I can never forget the first meeting. She was like, I just need to be upfront with you. I don't, this church stuff, it's bull. I don't believe in it. I don't even know that I believe in God.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Yeah.
So she was not. She wasn't angry about it or mean, but it was very clear that she had some resistance. So what surprised me is she kept coming back, and that always really shocked me. And she would say, I just need to let you keep saying, I don't believe in all this. I don't even know that I believe in anything beyond myself. Oh, that's okay. You don't have to. And I'll say it's not her real name, but we'll say her name's Jennifer. So I was like, Jennifer, that's fine. You don't have to. This being in this group isn't about belief. So what happened though over a period of time is that we would have these conversations, and all of a sudden she would speak, and she would begin to tell something in her life about how God did this.
Okay.
And she started using language about and I even actually, I mean, we're a very honest group. I was like, Jennifer, it's kind of funny to me. You said you don't believe any of this, but all of a sudden you're sharing a story about how you saw maybe God working. And she was like, yeah, I think I was afraid to call it by name.
Wow.
And that trust that we built over that period of time helped her begin to name the spiritual parts of her experience and be open to this idea that there is something beyond her that loves her deeply as a creator, and who loves her and cares for her. And this all led to where I want to really go at the end of the story, which is we had been going, I guess, about 4 years at this point. She calls me one day and she's like, I need to let you know me and my husband are splitting up.
Oh no.
We're gonna get a divorce. But she said, before we do, I want to just talk to you. I was like, sure. So whether she realized it or not, she was asking for a pastoral visit. And that's what I began to do for both him and her, is have this pastoral conversation with them around, what they're feeling, what they're enduring. I helped them find a marriage counselor to connect with, and they're still married to this day and still attending to this day. And one of the things she will tell you, she's one of the first people at Sacred L that says, had it not been for this group, had it not been for Travis the preacher, I wouldn't be married today. Our marriage wouldn't have survived. So that's powerful for me, man.
Yeah,
like that.
4 years. So that goes into this marathon mindset, right? And so relationships are messy. They're rough. Relationships in ministry, more often than not, are even messier. But so oftentimes people come into relationships with a sprint approach, a sprint mindset. And I guess everybody's different. This is a pretty concrete statement, but God's in the marathon. Like in the majority of the relationships that I'm invested in deeply, there are seasons where you get it right, seasons where you get it wrong, and seasons where you get it right again. But there's this elongated marathon of authenticity and transparency, and that for her to be there 4 years before she begins to use some of this language, and then 9 years later for the two of them to still be showing up. The beer must be really good. Well,
maybe that's what's holding them there. It's really amazing what God does in these contexts, though, and that's how I see it. I see it as God's work, and I see God working in people's lives. And I'll tell you briefly another story. Had a young man African American man, attending Sacred L, attended months, and he never spoke a word. He never interacted. He would just sit there and he would listen. Slowly, after about 4 or 5 months, he began to talk about his experience of being a young black man in our community and kind of what he's seen and what he's dealt with. He began to share that. About a year into being a part of the group, he finally said, I need to tell you all something. He said, I've never told anyone this in my life. He said, I've never felt safe in my current church context to say this. I've never felt safe with a group of people to say this. In my culture, this is hard to process and deal with. He said, but I'm a homosexual black man. And he said, I've never said that before.
Out loud.
I never said it out loud to anyone, but he chose our group. He chose our group to enter that moment of tender conversation and vulnerability. And the fact that he felt safe enough there to say that, the fact that he felt that he could be vulnerable, that we weren't going to attack him at that very moment, man, that speaks volumes to the trust that was built.
Trust, yeah.
And God's in the trust building business.
Yeah, that makes me think of that book, The Speed of Trust, Character and Competency. What is that, Richard Covey? Whoever that guy is that wrote The Speed of Trust. But these two attributes, character and competency. And as our character is revealed and we prove ourselves competent in loving people and in confidentiality and all these other things, then the speed of trust is expedited. And the opposite is equally true. As negative characteristics are revealed or lack of competency, then trust is eroded. So that so from talk about Michael Beck, from the ashes. So from these ashes of your deepest, darkest wounds, a season of kind of metamorphosis, then you're equipped and you come into this place where you're doing ministry in an extremely non-traditional way, and those interactions and those relationships are bearing fruit, right? So then is there a part in your life where you start into any of this tug of war of like, so should I still even be in the inherited church, or should I still be a part of what we know to be traditional ministry, or was that always was there ever a tug of war in you where it was either or was it always both and?
That's a great question. There definitely was a point where I began to ask the question of, okay, is this the field I'm called to harvest? Okay, is this where I need to spend my laboring all the time? Is outside the traditional setting? And one of the things I began to be very aware of after doing this for quite some time was that no, we need both. There doesn't need to be just one.
Yeah.
There needs to be both. And both of these need to work in tandem.
Amen, man.
The inherited church has a place in this new work. And part of that place is loving, supporting, giving permission to people to go out and do these type things, and providing some sense of structure to it, you know? Because here's the thing, you can go out and create a community of a lot of trust and a lot of love, and that's also how cults get started.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
So you want to always balance that with, okay, what's guiding the work that we're doing, what anchors the work that we're doing, what truths do we carry from our faith, our doctrine, into what we're doing. All those things matter, and the traditional church, the inherited church, plays a role in those. And it plays a major role in permission giving and helping financially support this work too. Fresh expressions, in itself shouldn't really cost a lot to pull off, but there are certain components of it that do need the organizational structure that's larger than one person. To make happen.
I like the idea of the accountability. I mean, to have the checks and balances and the accountability in there, so you're not just a wingnut out on some tangent, is very, very important. And and I know this is not the why, I know it's not the agenda, have any of your Sacred Ale folks found their way to your local church?
And that's one of the interesting things about pastoring a church an hour away from where I do Fresh Expressions work.
So Sacred Ale is not in Asheville.
It's not in Asheville. No, it's in Rutherfordton.
Okay.
Yeah. So Sacred Ale developed long before I was at the current church I am now.
Right.
In terms of serving as a bivocational minister, Sacred Ale has been around longer than that.
Right.
Now, so it happens. Sacred Ale happens here where I live.
Okay.
That's where it's based.
Okay.
Now, I've not been at the current ministerial location that I am now a long time, so we're talking about developing something similar there, doing some things there.
Okay.
But right now, this community is still running here with support of the church in Asheville. But under it, but not directly in the same city.
Okay.
But I do want to say it has had some individuals who found trust again in Christian faith and then wanted to reconnect with the inherited church.
Wow.
That's not been the majority, but it's definitely been some. I think Michael Beck calls those folks bridgebacks, those who connect in these Fresh Expression communities and then find their way back to an inherited church. And there's definitely been that. I mean, I'll never forget, one of my greatest feelings of elation was that I got a message one day from somebody who had been attending Sacred Ale, and they said, "Hey, just want to let you know, this past Sunday I went to blank and blank church, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you for giving me the idea that church could be healthy and whole.
Oh, wow.
And that, and that I could be safe there again. Thank you."
What a compliment,
so,
man.
It made me feel so good because there were two feelings with that. One was elation that what we did made this lady feel safe enough to go back to church, that all Christians weren't the same. What she experienced wasn't necessarily always what you're going to experience with a Christian church or faith. But then the other side of me thought, oh man, I hope she doesn't get hurt again.
Yeah.
Like there's this sense of, okay.
Protector, yeah, that's the shepherd, that's the pastoral heart there.
Yeah.
So that answers my question. And I was wondering how the people in your local church received the Sacred Ale, folks. So like here in our context, several years ago, 3 years ago, we started a weekly lunch down at a hotel. So there's a hotel a couple miles from the church. It has permanent residents in it, that have resided there longer than a year. And so we started no strings attached, a weekly meal, a really good home-cooked meal, everybody. But we have seen people from there come to our local church, and I have been pleasantly surprised, and so encouraged by the way our people within our local church have embraced and accepted our people within our lunch ministry. This is not being judgmental about our people. I would not have expected that. I wouldn't have expected them to be ugly at all.
Sure.
But I would have expected there to be like some separation, and that has not been the case at all. Yeah. I mean, when people find their way to the church, our folks just envelop them. So that's why I was asking about if any of your Sacred Ale people had found their way to your local church.
I just thought about something I wanted to mention. You said a few minutes ago, have I ever stopped and thought, hey, should I just be into this 100% and get kind of step away from the traditional inherited church? What was really funny is our last Sacred Ale, a gentleman there asked me, he said, so why do you keep doing this? Like, what are you getting out of this?
What's the catch?
Yeah. He said, so what, what is this feeding in you? What is this feeding in you? And to which I said, I called his name and I said, what it's feeding in me is that the reason I keep doing this is I believe with all my heart that there is power in communal connection and doing life together. And whether you want to call that meeting at such First United Methodist Church at 11 a.m. on Sunday, or whether you call that meeting in this pub on a Tuesday night at 7 p.m., there's power in doing life together. And I believe that when we do life together, God is there and God is at work. And I said, so that's what I'm getting out of this. I'm getting fed in terms of being in community with you. Wow. So that kind of goes back to what my thought was on that. I was like, okay, he's asking me, why do I keep doing this? But it goes back to that same answer. It's and it goes back to loneliness and isolation. I find connection and community in both places. 7 o'clock on Tuesday night, I find it 11 a.m. on Sunday morning. And
so that's a great segue, a great transition back to your work on loneliness, because I don't want time to get away from us I don't want to rob our people from your work in that, because it's fascinating to me just in the couple of conversations that we've had when we're together in person. So you had done this research and you were learning about isolation and loneliness, and then the pandemic hits, right? And so on the back side of that was your work just amplified all the more. Let's kind of talk through that.
It was. And one of the things that we saw, because I operate a nonprofit mental health clinic, and what we began to see was the need and appointment requests went out the roof. I mean, we're talking about 400 or 500% increase in terms of people asking for connection, and what we were hearing in those private conversations and in the therapists were hearing in those rooms was that I'm scared. And so that one thing I want to say there, fear feeds isolation and loneliness. They go hand in hand. Some people might feel like, well, fear, and let's take it from a 10,000-foot view of our society. A lot of people have said, well, I guess with the polarization of our society, there must be less loneliness because people have found each other and they've kind of cocooned into their little subset. Mm-hmm. What we found with research is the complete opposite. The more polarized we are, we don't get more connected with people like us. We actually get more withdrawn and isolated.
Wow.
But it's because of the fear. It's because of the fear that feeds this loneliness and isolation and this pulling back into our own cocoon instead of being with other people. And that's what we began to hear over and over in the private sessions. We saw it just in terms of the number of people that were requesting appointments. I mean, the pandemic, this is the best way I can explain it. You know, if you had something on the stove simmering, you had it on low, you're already getting a little bubbles in there. Man, so that was already happening in our society. 2018, we know there was a loneliness report that came out then that said, okay, this is a problem. But what happened with the pandemic is it's like turning the flame up. Now it's boiling. Okay. So you had a problem that was simmering, and the pandemic literally turned the flames up under it, and now it's boiling over out of the pot. And that's what happened with many of us who were working in the mental health field. That's what we saw. And we were trying to deal with that carnage of it boiling over and trying to help people find some sense of connection, find some sense of soothe their fears and work through that. And the pandemic just increased what was already happening. It just multiplied it.
Which it doesn't make sense to me. I mean, it does. But it doesn't make sense to me. We supposedly, through our phones and all of these, whatever, the social stuff, we are more connected now. Yeah. I mean, you're in North Carolina, I'm in Missouri, and we're talking together.
Yeah, like we're in the same room.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I mean, you might as well be sitting. People who listen to this show consistently text me and say, love the new format. I feel like I'm sitting with you, like we're catching up. Supposedly, we are more connected now than we have ever been as a people. But loneliness and isolation is the new pandemic. Like it is.
Oh, it is the new one.
It is the killer of people. So how do we reconcile that? How can we be both the most connected people in the history of civilization and the most isolated and lonely? I know you know the answer, but just walk us through that.
Yeah. So what we've learned is the speed in which we connect and the ability in which we can connect quicker, faster, more visual doesn't change the quality of the interaction.
Oh gosh, that is good.
So the quality of the interaction is really where we want to be. And there are some places that have created an online community that are addressing loneliness and feeling connected. But for most of us, what we have on this really isn't quality. Most of it is actually increasing our feeling of inadequacy. It's increasing our sense of frustration or loneliness, anger, fear. So here's the thing. The connectedness we have through these is not the problem. It's what we've done with it that's been the problem. One of the things that I say, and I truly believe this, social media, AI technology, whatever we want to put in the blank, it only allows us to do what our heart is bent on doing faster.
Say that again.
Yeah, so technology, it only allows us to do quicker what our heart is already bent toward doing.
Gosh, that's good. Man, that is a quote.
Yeah. So if we have our heart bent toward division, if we have our heart bent toward anger, increasing paranoia, fear, it just allows us to do that stuff quicker.
It expedites.
It expedites it. It makes it faster.
Wow.
Those who have their heart bent toward reconciliation and love and kindness, it also allows that to happen as well.
Wow.
But yeah, unfortunately, that seems to be happening less than the other.
So what can be our blessing could also be our curse.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's like anything else, I guess our giftings and graces and all those things, the way that we're hardwired can be our doing or our undoing. So, we talk a lot about, I was in student ministry forever, and I used to talk often about how, the scrolling and what we're doing is, so we're with us 24/7, right? And we know how ordinary our lives are. And what we're doing is we are comparing our ordinary to everybody else's peak. So nobody, I mean, unless you're a weirdo like me, nobody's just going to post the ordinary, like, just having a ho-hum day. You know what I mean? It's like you're getting like the highlights of everybody else's life or their drama, one of the two. So much to say about that, but we'll leave that alone. So you're getting one of those two things, but what you're doing is you're not. So we subconsciously or consciously, we're comparing our ordinary to everybody else's peak. Does that fuel isolation?
Absolutely, because it creates more of an inadequacy in us if we're not aware that that's what's happening.
Yeah.
It's easy to think, oh my gosh, my life here in North Carolina is just so ho-hum when I'm looking at Ben who's surfing in Hawaii today.
Yeah.
It's like, no, man, you said it. I'm getting your best.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So as long as you know that, you can kind of settle into it. But there's so many of us, probably subconsciously, don't even think about it. We're just like, wow, look at Ben's life. It's so much better than mine. This isn't fair.
Yeah. and in reality, to be human is to hurt. So whoever you're looking at, whatever you're scrolling through, they're hurting just as much as you are.
And I would say sometimes those who are needing that attention might be hurting worse.
Oh, gosh, that's good, man. Yeah. So what is the nonprofit then that you started and running? What's that called? It's
called Blue Ridge Hope.
Okay.
And we are we're not affiliated with a church. We're an independent nonprofit, but we offer mental health care to our area regardless of their ability to pay. We raise money. We write grants to try to meet that need, because what we were seeing here, the particular county I live in, Rutherford County, our poverty rate's 19%. It's really high. A lot of people hit that little area with Medicaid where they don't quite qualify for it, but they also don't have enough to do a private session, because most private sessions of mental health are going to be somewhere between $110 to $160. Just that's the average rate for a private session without insurance.
Wow.
So we look to work with therapists that connect with us, that we can pay them and these individuals get the care they need without carrying that financial burden.
Wow. So then do your clients go to those doctors' offices, or do the doctors come to your clinic and then the clients come to your clinic?
Yeah, so we have our own therapists that are here with us all the time.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yes. So how we do that is we have a split model. If someone has insurance, we bill it. If they don't, we try to work with them on a sliding scale to make it affordable for them. Gotcha. And we compensate the difference. So our model works that we make some money, yes, but then other times we don't, and we lose a lot. So we just try to balance that out through grants and private fundraising, so that we're not always in the hole. So if you had just a couple of, and I'm putting you on the spot here, but if you had just a couple of tips, a couple of your go-tos, if you're sitting down at Sacred Ale, you got a guy that's been there, he's relatively new to the group, some trust is established, he begins to confide in you these lonely, as communicators, as pastors, we're application driven. I know I am. I don't want somebody just to tell me something. I want them to give me some tools. What are some of your go-tos when it comes to pushing back against isolation and loneliness? What are some of your most common tips or helpful hints as far as application if somebody's listening? So first off, I want to encourage them to find a place where they feel safe and they feel they can be vulnerable and other people are vulnerable.
Okay.
So to me, Sacred L can be one of those places. So I want to see them first get connected in a consistent community where you're having an authentic relationship with another person. Mm-hmm. We're not talking about this bull where everything looks golden and everything's great, kind of like the Instagram society. Yeah. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about let's have a real authentic conversation in a place where you can get connected. So I want to help them find that. So if they're not local, and they're just kind of happen into our group for a couple of weeks, and I know they're going to be leaving, then I want to talk to them about finding something wherever they are. Okay. That's number one. Number two is, I mean, I have a little bias toward this, but if you're feeling a significant amount of isolation and loneliness, I would love to be able to get you connected with a good therapist who can talk you through some of that and walk you through some of that. So again, you're not feeling so alone in your loneliness. Mm-hmm. So I want to encourage them, let's get you connected with that if that's something you're dealing with.
Gotcha.
And what we know to be true about the loneliness research is when people are in authentic community, where they feel that there is, what's the best word to use here? When they feel there's a support system there, that they can be vulnerable and they can let down their guards and lay down their fear, the loneliness subsides. Now, it may not always go away, but it subsides. So if it's a level 10, and it can come down to 6 or 5. So being in a safe community is going to be key to anybody who is dealing with loneliness and isolation.
Man, that's good. Thank you. Yeah, so that is there and this is just my ignorance, but I would think, maybe not, is there a gap between male and female? Is in your research, in your numbers, in your studies, and what's bringing this kind of line of thought is you were saying that, finding a community to connect with, but then counseling. So I'm a deep believer in counseling, right? So as a person who wrestled through and fought and debilitating anxiety, I mean crippling anxiety for 4 years, it was therapy that the Lord used to kind of spring me out of a lot of that. Talking about wounded healers, it kind of takes one to know one in that regard too. And so as other folks, specifically men, younger men, find their way to me counseling wise, and they're dealing with anxiety and depression, when I try to suggest find a good counselor, like one that's worth their salt, and give them your guts, like just let the walls down and give them your guts. There is this, you can kind of see this force field that goes up. Are you all experiencing that, or when you're with guys, is there a gap between male and female?
There can be. Okay. What I'm seeing more than that is, and I don't know how much time we have, but I would love to go into this brief explanation.
You go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things I saw in grief work years ago, I think also applies to just how we process anything in life in general. Okay. So not just grief. But one of the things we thought years ago in grief, we thought that the only way to experience grief was to have this emotive experience. So we would tell people, well, if they're not crying, we want to get in there and dig in there and make you cry a little bit, get these feelings out. And so Kenneth Doka started this fascinating research, and he went into this thinking that he was going to find a male pattern of grieving and a female kind of pattern of grieving, a gender identity. Sure. So he went in thinking, okay, this is clearly where we're going to find the difference. So he went into this research, and what he found out was there are some characteristics that might be more masculine or feminine, but overall, there are two main grieving patterns, and they defy gender in terms of being male or female. One is what we call intuitive grievers, and one is called an instrumental griever. And the instrumental griever is the non-traditional griever, the one who typically needs to do something with their grief, means they need to live it out in some way. And I'll explain that more in just a minute than just talking about it. The intuitive grievers, like I'm an intuitive griever, and I know that. Even though I'm a male, I need to talk it out. I have to process it verbally. I have to be emotional with what I'm going to lay out there and feel. That helps me walk through my experiences of grief. Instrumental grievers, on the other hand, have to do something with it. So here's a good example. I was working with a couple who lost a child in an auto accident.
Oh, no.
And I was offering grief counseling for them. And the wife was coming in, and she was an intuitive griever. She was just laying it all out. Just very emotional getting that out. And one of the things she said in our session is, I'm so angry at my husband. He doesn't grieve. He gets up every morning. He goes to his workshop. I don't see him till 5 o'clock. They both were retired. Mm-hmm. I don't see him till 5, 6 o'clock. He comes back in the house. It's like he's just not bothering him. So I said, well, why don't we get together? Let's talk together. So he came in for a session, and she laid that out, how she was feeling. And he said, what do you mean you don't think I don't grieve? He's like, I think about our son every day. He said, I'm going out to my workshop, because he worked with stone. He was literally building a headstone for their child.
Oh, wow.
So his grief was instrumental.
Yeah.
He had to do something with it. So I think that carries over also, though, into our mental health.
Okay. There's
some of us who really process verbally and emotively, and there's some of us who might need to do something alongside of feeling. Put an action to it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that makes so much sense, man. In some of the deepest, darkest times of my life, I don't want to talk about it, but I'll go split wood from morning until the sun goes down. It's almost like, but I never understood that's what that was. I thought it was not
You're probably an instrumental
not
griever.
punishing yourself, but it's like the manual labor. It's some kind of outlet in the. That's wild, dude. Thank you. I did not know that those were things. I just knew a lived experience was in the hurt. When the hurt gets too bad, I don't need to talk about it. I need to go do something. Wow.
That you probably have an instrumental pattern. Yeah. So I think that's true for our mental health too. A lot of us need to do something some of us need to do something with it, physically. Again, for me, I'm an intuitive griever. That's where my head is. But for years in grief and loss work, we made people feel terrible about themselves because we were like, no, you got to talk about it. You got to cry. You got to grieve. And what this research from DOCA that was back in the 90s began to teach us was, no. At the end, as long as people use the pattern that's innate to them, which one of those two, the grieving process looks healthy at the end.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man, that's crazy. Yeah. So I have a friend here. Your story and her story parallel a lot. You know, you were in vocational ministry early, and she was to. Your path led you into grief ministry, and hers did too. And just a lot of parallels. I look forward to sending her a link for this episode, and so that she can listen through that. And I bet you she would have a lot of really, really cool feedback. It'd be neat if you all met each other and knew each other.
I'd love to do that. Maybe we need to do one together one time.
Yeah, that'd be fun too.
Focus just on grief.
Yeah, so does isolation then? Is isolation a form of grief? Or do those...
that's a good question.
I mean, are those... How does that... I guess what I'm getting at is, could talking through versus some physical... Like when it comes to isolation and loneliness... I mean, is that does a person have to be depressed to experience isolation and loneliness? Is it a form of grief? What are we dealing with specifically in the vein of isolation and loneliness? Is it some combination?
That's a great question, and I think it probably is a combination. I mean, I have so much work in the grief and loss field that I want to say, sure, it's a form of grief. It's like that's the glasses that I wear and how I see a lot of the world. So I think it is an element of grief because usually, and there's a difference between loneliness and isolation. They can go hand in hand. One of the most amazing things that I found out in research is that the loneliness level of society is not necessarily determined of whether they're in a faith community or not. Some of the people who attend church every week rank with some of the loneliest people in the world, the United States.
Gosh, that should not be so.
it's not. It shouldn't be so. And that's why I really push in this movement of fresh expressions, creating, and I said this a few moments ago, finding a place that's an authentic community where you can be vulnerable and other people are vulnerable with you. So many times in church, we at least in the inherited church, we have this model where we throw up the best self and we show up into those spaces and everything's great. Yes, brother, everything's fantastic.
Yeah.
You know, and we put on this mask for the hour that we're there, and then we leave, and nobody is really to the wiser that we're hurting. So that's why I hypothesize that's why people in mainline churches still are some of the loneliest people. Is not because the church itself isn't good. It's that the community that's there isn't being authentic.
And I'd say that just from my observation, and it may be just because birds of a feather flock together, but I think the pendulum is beginning to swing some with our generation of leaders.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that we grew up in do as I say, not as I do culture. And it's kind of like, you know, your parents are your parents, and there's things that you witness and live through with your folks, and it's like, I want to implement that in my own home. And then there's things it's like, I would rather not do that in my own home when I have kids. I think there's a generation of pastoral leaders now that grew up in the context of church where it was do as I say, not as I do, or this facade, everything's good. And again, maybe it is a fishbowl. Maybe it is just birds, people who are like-minded flock together too much. But I would like to think that the pendulum is beginning to swing some where authenticity is a component in our rhythms of grace and in our cultures within our local churches, I would hope.
Me too. I hope so. And I think you're right. Again, you may have hit the nail on the head. It may be because I'm talking to people who are more of the way I'm thinking. But I am seeing that more so today than definitely I did 20 years ago when I started.
All right, one last thing before we go, just for clarity. So you say, I think I heard, you said loneliness and isolation are not the same thing. Right. Will you talk us through that a little bit? Because that'll help me.
So they can go in hand, but for let's take for example those people who are in mainline churches that still are ranking lonely. They're not isolated.
Okay.
They are connecting with people in flesh. They're there.
Okay.
But they still feel loneliness. Okay. So sometimes people who are not isolated, meaning people who are gathering in places, may still rank pretty high on the loneliness scale. So that's how those two are different. You can be connected yet still lonely.
So is isolation physical and lonely is emotional? Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. I haven't thought through that what you just said, but I think that to me feels yes. I think you're onto it.
So isolation is more physical.
Yeah.
Lonely is mental or emotional.
Right, and those can happen simultaneously. They definitely can happen. And then there's a few people who would be isolated, but yet not necessarily feel lonely.
Yeah. I know some people like that. I do. I know some people like that could live way out by themselves and never really feel or have that loneliness.
Yeah.
And then, to your point, other people that can be in a crowded room and feel alone.
Very lonely.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Awesome, dude. All right. Well, that is a full episode, chock full of meat. We'll stop from there. You're one of the ones. So there's only a handful of people that I want to cycle back through at some point, sooner rather than later, because I feel like there's a ton that we didn't touch or didn't get to, or that we could kind of flesh out more. But just thank you for your time, man.
Thank you.
I appreciate you so much. The first time we met over at Dayton, at some of the prayer time or something, I was sharing about my dad's surgery. I was leaving there, flying back to Georgia because Pop was having a big major surgery, and you were so faithful in those days, but then weeks even after, months after, texting to check in on us, check in on my dad, and let me know that you were praying, and that means a lot to me, man. That I appreciate you, your heart. You're one of the good ones, dude, for what that's worth. Not that I get to determine who are the good ones and the bad ones, but you're one of the good ones. And so I really do look forward to these next 3 years together, continuing to grow together, make memories and hang out, learn together, maybe to a degree commiserate some.
I think we will be doing that.
To commiserate.
That's part of authenticity.
Yes.
That's part of authenticity.
Yeah, together. But I'm just super thankful for you. I'm thankful to God that our paths crossed. And so
I feel the same way.
Thanks for your time, man. And I will. Is it all right if people reach out for more information? Send them your way.
Absolutely. I welcome conversation. I welcome trying to provide resources for people.
Awesome.
I mean, we're in this business to help people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what God called us to.
Sweet. All right. So I end every episode with the same question. The name of the podcast is the Keep It Simple Podcast. So Travis Smith, how do you keep things simple?
I look to laugh every day.
Oh, that's good.
Laughter grounds me. And I think of being grounded is finding the power in simplicity. So I'm going to look for ways to laugh every day.
Oh, wow. Amen, dude. That's gold. Hey, thank you for your time. Thank you for who you are and whose you are. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, buddy.
See you.
Appreciate it.